Great. So we're expecting a few more people, but I think in the interest of timekeeping, we will get started and people can join during the opening. I'm going to hand over to Ian Hutchson, who is going to be chairing for us today. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you very much, Emily, and welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Our aim of this session is to focus on the built environment chapter of the Interim Devon Carbon Plan. We've got a great lineup of local experts that you're going to be able to ask questions of, and I'd ask that you put your questions in the chat function of Zoom. I hope everybody can see that, but you will see at the bottom of the Zoom window there's a little icon that says chat. So if you can put your questions in there, we will endeavour to answer as many of those as we can, and we'll be keeping an eye on them during the next hour. And there will be a section of the next hour where we will specifically pull out those questions, and we'll have a panel of local experts to answer those for you. Second thing to say is that we will be recording this session so that other people can see it who couldn't join us today. So if you're not happy with that, just turn your video off. Use the icon in the bottom left of the Zoom window where you can stop the video, and then your image won't be recorded. But just be aware we're recording it so other people can see it and benefit from it after today. So should we just go through the agenda, Emily? That's the next slide.
Yeah, we can. Sorry, I'm having a technical issue here, which is very rookie of me.
Don't worry, don't worry. Everything goes swimmingly, doesn't it? Until it doesn't.
I've done this all week and it's been going totally fine. Sorry, one moment. Let me just. I'm really sorry about this. This is extremely amateur.
Don't worry at all. I'll tell you what, I'll just talk through what is on the next slides. I know what's on the slides, I've seen them. So I'll just introduce. So first of all, I introduce myself. So my name's Ian Hutchson. I was invited to be a member of the Net Zero Task Force. I've been working in net zero carbon buildings for a long time now. I work with Energiesprong and I work with Regen as well. We've got speakers coming up. We're going to have a discussion with Karime Hassan, who is Chief Executive and Growth Director of Exeter City Council. Nicola Corrigan is going to join us for that session as well. Nicola is Director of one of our leading community energy organisations in the county, 361 Energy, based in North Devon. And for the panel session, we've also got some other members, two other members of the task force. So James Shorten is a planner working in the private sector and also a member of the task group with a good focus on the built environment and how we get it to net zero. And Tim Jones, who is a leading Southwest business representative, and he's also worked in commercial property for all his career as well. He's also chairman of the North Devon UNESCO Biosphere Foundation as well. And then Emily, who you've met from Devon County Council, and Hannah, who's also working on communications for the Devon Carbon Plan, will be speaking to us. So shall we just move on to, how are you doing, Emily, with the slides?
It's still not sharing the right screen, is it?
Do you want me to try and share my?
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I don't know what's happening here, but I've lost the screen that I need.
Don't worry, don't worry. I will try and share. Oh, I'm not allowed. I'm disabled from screen sharing. Well, I can't share them.
Oh God, I'm so sorry about this. One moment. There you go, Ian. You're now co-host.
I'm a co-host, so I will share the. So I'm just uploading now. There. Can everybody see the slides? Can you see the slides?
Yep.
Okay, I am not going to go into full screen. I'm going to run it like that. I hope that's okay with everybody. Should we just go straight onto the background to the Devon Climate Emergency, to the slide there. Do you want to talk through this, Emily?
Yes, thank you, Ian. Sorry about that. Thanks for coming to my rescue.
Okay.
So to introduce the Devon Climate Emergency Partnership, the overall objectives of the partnership is to create a resilient net zero carbon Devon where people and nature thrive. So to do that, we need to reduce emissions in Devon to net zero, and also prepare the landscape of Devon to be more resilient to the climate change that we're locked into, and prepare our communities for a warmer world, because we are expecting some of the effects of climate change that we're locked into, such as an increase in risk of flooding. So net zero, well, that basically means that we need to balance any remaining emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere with things that draw down emissions from the atmosphere, such as tree planting. So the partnership, you can see the logos on the right hand side there. It's a mixture of local authorities, all local authorities in Devon, as well as some of the emergency response services, environmental organisations and private enterprises such as Western Power Distribution. So a really good partnership of organisations there. Thank you, Ian. If I can have the next slide.
Yeah.
So the partnership is led at a strategic level by the response group, which is chaired by Phil Norrie from Devon County Council, who was re-elected recently, and the chair is re-elected on is elected on a 12-month basis. So it's CEO director level representation from the organisations on this group, and they're supported by a tactical group, which is an opportunity for staff in these different organisations to share learnings and progress on their collaboration to achieve net zero. And one of the first things they did was create a declaration which acknowledges the climate emergency and also commits the organisations to responding to it and reducing their own emissions. There's two work streams, so mitigation, which is emissions reduction, and that's led by an independent volunteer net zero task force with 15 experts on it, and they've produced this interim Devon carbon plan, and that's chaired by Patrick Devine-Wright, an author on the International Panel on Climate Change report, and the adaptation stream, so how we help our communities be ready for a warmer world, is chaired by Helen Dobby at the Environment Agency, and is a collaboration with Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, so it's a regional response through the Climate Impacts Group. Great, thank you, Ian. So the Interim Devon Carbon Plan, as I said, it's been produced by the Net Zero Task Force, and there was an evidence gathering phase. So there was a call for evidence from the public, which approximately 900 individuals responded to, as well as a youth parliament event with schools invited to, and thematic hearings, which are sort of round table meetings of experts to gather evidence. And this was brought together to produce the Interim Devon Carbon Plan that's now out for public consultation. Originally, a citizens' assembly was to be held before the publication of the plan, but the pandemic made that not possible. So the plan's been produced with indications of the issues that should be considered by the citizens' assembly, and will be revised to include to include and reflect the deliberation of the Citizens' Assembly once that's taken place next summer. And it's the more controversial issues that are going to the Citizens' Assembly. Thank you, Ian. So the plan considers the date for net zero, which is considered primarily as 2050, but it describes what needs to happen to achieve net zero, and the challenges of achieving those things on earlier dates such as 2030 or 2040. And that's one of the things that the consultation wants to ask your opinion on. So do go and have your say on that point. It provides information about the carbon budgets required to meet, to step down to net zero by 2050, and the costs and opportunities and the co-benefits of doing that. So it's very clear that we don't have all of the resources and the funding that we need now to achieve net zero, and there's some headline figures given in the plan of sort of resources that would be required, and the funding status and where funding might come from for different actions is indicated where that is known. But it, as I said, it highlights the opportunities that there are for individuals and organisations to realign existing spending. So, for example, you might choose, when replacing your boiler, to choose a hydrogen-ready boiler. So it recognises that Devon is a rural county, and so that has specific challenges, and achieving the plan will differ in specifics in a town and cities compared to the more rural areas. So the overall co-benefits of achieving net zero is that Devon could be a fairer, healthier, more resilient and more prosperous society. And the co-benefits are health and well-being, prosperity and environment primarily, so we can have warmer homes, more active lifestyles and healthier diets, new jobs and skills, and retain spending locally, as well as enhancing and regenerating nature to reduce flood risk and improve water and air quality. So lots to be gained aside from managing climate change. So I'll hand back to Ian now.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you. And we were going to do some polls, weren't we?
Yes. Shall I launch the polls?
Yes. Why don't we do that?
Great. So you should be able to see that now. We just wanted to find out the opinions of those in the room. So a few more people to vote. That's almost all of you. A few more seconds. Great, I'm going to end polling. And can you nod if you can see the results?
I can see them.
Great, so there's an interesting spread of what people are interested in the room. A lot of people interested in planning more generally. So James Shorten, the planning expert on the task force, will be interested to see that. But also a good split between interest in housing and commercial buildings. So it's great, we'll take your questions on that later. So I've got one more question. So one or two of you still to vote. Okay. So somewhat unsurprisingly, I suppose, most people haven't engaged in the government's Green Home Grant, but great to see that some people in the room have, and also interesting to see that a few people are not aware of this offer of a grant to help people make energy efficiency improvements to their houses that was recently launched by the government. So I'm sure we can signpost to that later on in the session. Great, well, we'll have an opportunity to ask a few more questions later.
Great, thank you, Emily. So let's go into what is actually in the chapter of the Interim Devon Carbon Action Plan for the built environment. So let's make sure we're on the right slide. There, is this the right slide to start off with, Emily?
I think there might be one before that.
Yes, I thought there was as well. There we are. That's the right slide to start on. So what we're saying in this chapter with regard net zero Devon and the built environment is that we need to improve the standard and comfort and efficiency of our buildings, both new and old, and get them to net zero. And this is really important to the net zero plan because 42% of Devon's carbon emissions come from our buildings. It comes from heating them, it comes from lighting them and powering them and using appliances in our buildings and hot water use. 42% of all emissions come from our built environment, together with a little bit from things like lighting of outside buildings as well, but primarily it's heating and hot water in buildings and power use. And when you think about buildings and you think about the other sectors of emissions, such as transport, for example, or the electricity grid, for example, for electricity grid and the transport network, there are solutions on the shelf. We kind of know what the future looks like. For the electricity grid, it means more renewable energy and turning fossil fuel power stations off and replacing them with wind turbines and PV and renewable energy. For mobility, for transport, it means reducing the need to travel and converting our vehicles to electric vehicles from fossil fuel vehicles. And you can see clearly what the future looks like. But with our building stock, you know, one of our biggest sources of emissions, I don't think we can really say that there's a solution on the shelf that we can use to make all our buildings that are here today net zero in the near future. However, there is a way forward, there's a clear route forward for building new buildings to make sure that they are net zero today. So the built environment is a critical element of the net zero plan. So first of all, the buildings that are here today are the ones that produce most of the carbon emissions in the future. And houses are responsible for about half the built environment emissions. So about 20% of Devon's total emissions come from our houses. So we need to be able to retrofit all our houses so that they can become net zero. So that means reducing the demand from houses, using energy more efficiently, and switching over from fossil fuel systems like gas over towards electric heating systems and power systems that are powered by renewable energy from the grid. About the other half of emissions come from non-domestic buildings. So that's shops and factories and offices and industrial buildings. So there it's a similar agenda. We need to make those more efficient so that they're using energy more efficiently. And we need to decarbonize the heating systems there. So moving away from gas towards electricity that is powered by renewable sources. And it goes without saying that the new buildings that are being built, we don't want to have to be retrofitting those in the near future. As quickly as possible, all new buildings built in Devon, both houses and non-domestic buildings, need to be built to net zero now. And there are other energy uses around buildings, like shared lighting and street lighting and lighting public spaces. So we need to get that as efficient as we can be, and converting it all to LED, which is the most efficient way of lighting. We need to do that as soon as possible. So if we do all of that, there's going to be some significant benefits to Devon that aren't just about net zero. So we're going to be building a reputation for being a centre of excellence in low carbon buildings. That's an opportunity for us here. If the energy efficiency of existing buildings is improved, then we save money. We save money on our energy bills. And there's lots of jobs involved in this. We need a new industry that could retrofit our new build to net zero. So there's an economic opportunity here for Devon. There's also a challenge to us all that our behaviour in our buildings will probably need to change somewhat. It might be that technology has a bigger hand in running our buildings, like if there's nobody in a room, automatically switching the lights off. But also our own behaviour needs to change a little bit as well. And it's not just about building new homes to net zero standards. They need to be desirable places to live and work. So this is not just net zero at the expense of those really important aesthetic qualities that make places great places to live. So this net zero needs to be integrated into high quality design and delivery of buildings. I think I've said a lot of that actually, but there are some other big ticket benefits from delivering net zero buildings. And one of those is health. You know, a lot of people live in cold homes where damp and condensation and mold has a really negative impact on health, costs the NHS a lot of money. If we can make homes net zero and healthy and affordable to be warm every day, then we are also helping to overcome one of the biggest challenges to health equalities in the county, which is the quality of the indoor environment that we're living in. So, should we do another opinion poll, Emily?
Great, yes, thank you, Ian. So it'd be interesting to see if you know the energy performance rating of your property. So a few more people to vote. Give you a few more seconds. Great, so that's quite an encouraging result that over half of people do know what the energy performance certificate rating of their property is, but still a significant proportion of the room are not sure what their rating is. So an interesting snapshot of the baseline we've got here. There's one more, two more questions to ask in fact. So have you installed energy efficiency or renewable energy measures in your property? Great, so a few more people to vote, a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to end polling. So by far the most people have insulated their loft, but then there's a real mixture of other measures which have been taken. So again, draft proofing and installing heating controls like thermostats and smart heating are quite popular. But there are some less usual things like wall cavity and solid wall insulation and renewable heating systems such as solar thermal. So really interesting to see what people in the room have been doing to their own houses. So we've got another question. What would encourage you to make further energy enhancements to your property? So a few more people to vote. I'll give you a few more seconds. Okay, so interesting to see that the leading thing that would encourage people is grants and or low interest loans. So more of some of what's already being offered by the government, and the ability to have trusted impartial advice and trusted installers again is coming through as something that is important to people. So that's good to see. So some of that is reflected in the plan. So do take a look at the detail. Great, thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Emily. It's really interesting answers there. And I'm pleased to say that, yes, they do reflect some of the actions that we've suggested in the built environment chapter of the plan. Things like provision of advice and financial help to people to do this, to their buildings, whether they're homes or commercial properties, are really important. So it's a good initial tie-up there with what we've put in the plan. So we're going to take 10 minutes now to have a bit of a conversation with two leading practitioners in the county, people who are actually getting their hands dirty and trying to sort this issue of net zero buildings out within their own organisations. Karime is the Chief Executive and Growth Director of Exeter City Council, one of the Devon Climate Emergency partners that's behind the plan, one of the 24 organisations that's commissioned this plan. And Nicola is involved with one of our leading community-based organisations in the county, 361 Energy, who are providing really high quality expert support to both households and small businesses to help them make their homes and buildings more energy efficient and affordable. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, Karime and Nicola, if that's okay with you, just to kick off a little bit of a conversation. And while we're doing that, if any attendees today, if you've got your questions, do remember to put them into that chat function, and following this chat with Karime and Nicola, we'll take some of your questions and put them to the panel. So keep your questions coming in. So Karime, I'm going to kick this off by patting you on the back, actually, first of all. Exeter City Council have done some great things with low carbon new build. You've built passive house standard new homes. You've even built the first, I think, in the country, passive house swimming pool. And you've also started retrofitting your housing stock using the Energiesprong approach to get to net zero. So I think the question I'd ask you is, how do you think we can quickly ensure that it's not just you and Exeter City Council, but it's all the climate emergency group members and private developers in the county are building to net zero as soon as possible? How do you think we can achieve that?
Well, one of the obvious ways of doing something about that, on the basis that it's not all going to be mandated by government, we're going to have to help ourselves, is the region often is the post box for a lot of funding that comes from government to help recovery. So our region, the local enterprise partnership, can begin to use its leverage over funding to say, we are mandating, if somebody takes funding, you have to deliver a certain performance. Certainly that was the way we pioneered district heating in Cranbrook, was to use regional funding to make sure the developers signed up to a higher level of environmental performance. So that's one obvious way, but I would say the power of the public sector to procure and to deliver by example, to develop supply chain, to deliver the learning, the skills that are required to deliver the products. So you've mentioned quite rightly that the City Council has only been building in recent years to passive house standards. What that has meant is it's given a pipeline for particular, which at the moment is niche developments, but it's allowing small firms and the contractors to get skilled up to deliver that product. And one of the things I'm seeing is leaders in the area, people like Steve Hindley. So Steve Hindley's chairman of Midas, in charge of MySpace, very, very vocal in terms of we as a sector should be delivering the zero carbon. And he's been basically advocating that whole life costs should be taken into account when you evaluate and do your appraisals. You've got the same kind of leadership being shown by Live West Housing Association, Paul Crawford, CEO of that company. So local leaders are doing their bit. People like Tim, who's a big advocate in terms of the business community in the Southwest, advocating for this agenda. So whatever the government does is one thing. Locally, we can do other things. We will use the planning tools to do it, but a lot of the planning tools are restricted by what national government allows us to do. So that's a challenge. I'll come to retrofit perhaps shortly, but in terms of new building, there's certainly the need to lead by example. Our local authorities and the public sector is certainly one of it.
Yes, thank you, Karime. Nicola, you support and speak to households and small businesses on a daily basis through 361 Energy. From what people ask you, what can you tell us about what people need to make their homes more energy efficient, to get them towards net zero, and how small businesses need help as well in their busy working lives? How can we get them to pay attention to their buildings and get them to net zero?
Phil, thank you, Ian. I was really pleased to see in the plan, it does tackle fuel poverty and the just transition to net zero. For us living in Devon, particularly in North Devon, we have really high levels of fuel poverty. In some areas, in some neighbourhoods, it can be as high as 20%. So it can be quite shocking when the national average is around 10%. So we've really got some big barriers to overcome. So some of the factors that are driving that are things like we've got 30% of our housing is solid wall, 20% of our homes are off gas. So there's some really big challenges to overcome. And of course, we know that if people are living in a cold home, that's going to ultimately impact their health and their well-being, putting pressure on services and the NHS as well. So I was really pleased to see in the plan the priority action around providing extra energy advice, which is something that community energy groups have been doing for many years now. So I think that community energy groups have really got an important role to play in delivering local help and advice to vulnerable clients locally, and especially as we tend to be independent and we can help people access grants like ECO, which is the energy company's obligation, and also help provide independent advice around energy efficiency improvements and behaviour change aspects as well, and help to drive down people's energy bills so they're more able to afford to put their heating on. And one of the programmes that we've worked on for a quite a few years now is the Local Energy Advice Partnership, and that has been great in accessing the eco installers and working with the councils to help drive down fuel poverty in the area. But obviously the scale of the challenge is huge, so we really support that action in the plan to provide more advice and help to the fuel poor. And I was just catching up on the government's new white paper actually. So they are going to be putting more funding into eco, the energy company obligation, and also things like the warm home discounts, which will help the fuel poor. And there's also going to be a new funding called the Home Upgrade Grant, or HUG for short. So I don't know much about that yet, but that does aim to tackle the worst first houses, which is obviously something that's a real big challenge for us in rural areas. And there's lots of things that we've been doing to try and address the challenge in North Devon. So in particular, we're working with One Northern Devon and the Health Service and social landlords to help identify the fuel poor and get them the help that they need. And we're working on a new initiative actually, which is quite groundbreaking, working with our local council with their disabled facilities grant residents as well, to make sure not only are they getting the adaptations that they need, but they're also getting the energy efficiency improvements that they need to stay in their home and make sure that they've got a warm home, particularly if they're ill and not moving around a lot. So that's in terms of the fuel poverty. In terms of SMEs, there's obviously lots of barriers there. You've mentioned that, you know, the lack of skills, knowledge and in-house expertise, and you know, it's an overwhelming and complex agenda, and government policy is changing all the time, so it's hard to keep up with if you're a small business, and that's just too much of a challenge and too much of a risk to get involved in this agenda. So it's really great to see that the policy is changing around that now, and that the interim plan is going to be supporting sort of confidence in the retrofit sector to make sure that we can get people trained up, and also the huge job growth and opportunity that there is around that. I think I was reading that at the moment, in the country, we install about 30,000 air source heat pumps a year. We're going to need to increase that to 600,000 air source heat pumps a year. So the scale of this, you know, is massive. So it's a huge opportunity for us in Devon. So this, you know, welcome these opportunities that are mentioned in the plan.
Thank you.
And I think, you know, for us as community energy organisations, we can really support SMEs with things like training, but of course we also need to create the demand as well. So we need to make sure that we've got consumer confidence and education and trusted local advice and quality assurance, so people know if something does go wrong that there'll be some fallback for them and they'll get help around that. And one of the things that we've been discussing for quite a few years actually at the Devon Community Energy Network is about building a cooperative around this, which I think is a really interesting idea and one that we should revisit. So you'll have heard of projects like Retrofit Works and the Carbon Co-op. So that's all about providing a framework between different stakeholders like community energy groups, local authorities and the supply chain to really help mobilise things locally. And then local people know that they're going to get trusted advice from people like retrofit advisors and assessors, and that they can trust in the advice and that they're going to get the help and support that they need. Because for many people that they might have, if they might be able to pay, but they just don't know where to turn to, and there's lots of different advice out there. So I think if we can come together as, you know, lots of different stakeholders in the region to build something on this, I think we can really make a big impact and help to drive retrofit in the region.
Yes, I think there's a common theme between what Karime and Nicola have both said there. It is really that, you know, there's a big economic opportunity here for the county. You know, rather than wasting money on importing fossil fuel energy, you know, if we can convert that into doing the capital works that need to be done to buildings, to insulate them and to power them renewably, there's a huge economic opportunity for us here that we need to grasp. Thank you, Karime and Nicola. I'm going to invite James and Tim to join the panel and open it up to questions from the audience. Doug, do you want to go through those questions in the chat function there and pick out some questions for us to answer?
Yes, I will, Ian. Yeah, thank you all for the chat. You've all been answering each other's questions on occasions there as well, so that's terrific. So I've tried to group some by themes because there's been a little bit of conversation around some similar points. Perhaps one for James. To what extent can local authorities require new development to be net zero if that's not a requirement by national government?
Well, this goes to many of the recommendations of the plan. I mean, if you can think about the plan, we had to write it with the assumption we could achieve net zero. And therefore, some of the things we're asking for aren't yet possible. And this is one of them. The government has effectively discouraged high energy standards in new build development. And all we can do is encourage it until that change occurs. So it's one of those things which is place marked for the future, but there's undoubtedly a lobbying role here because it's critically important. I mean, the plan makes a very strong statement that all new developments should be planned through the planning system to be net zero. There may be ways in which this can be encouraged, but ultimately we need a change in national policy as well to support that.
Thank you, James. Karime, did you want to come in on that one?
I think I covered that in my answer.
Yeah, we did touch on it earlier, didn't we? Okay, thanks, Karime. Question from Sophie. What options and support will there be for heritage homes? Perhaps that's one for Ian.
Gosh, heritage homes are difficult, aren't they? We want to protect the historical and aesthetic quality of our built environment. It's really important to all of us, and we wouldn't want to damage that in our rush to net zero. But I know that we've been doing some work looking at what the solutions might be for heritage buildings. For the sort of post First World War buildings, it's quite feasible to wrap buildings up like a tea cozy, get the energy demand right down, and then feed using efficient heating like a heat pump to provide the heat and power demands there. Historic buildings, you don't want to do that. You don't want to wrap them up from the outside. And what we probably need to do is insulate the internal walls, improve the quality of the windows, either through primary glazing or secondary glazing. There are some really interesting products coming out from the supply chain, such as suspended timber floors have always been a bit difficult and costly to insulate. There's a company called Qbot who have got a little robot that goes in through the air brick of the external wall, goes under the suspended timber floor, surveys it all, and then sprays foam that insulates it all and preserves the timber as well, without changing the aesthetic look and feel of the property. So mixing all those measures into those, historic properties is probably what we need to do, but while protecting their character, so that we preserve the character of the county at the same time.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Nicola, potentially one for you to have a go at here from Grant. How will landlords and tenants be helped to achieve EPC level C by 2035? What do we expect to come along from government, perhaps, on that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, because obviously we do have some legislation in place called the Minimum Energy Efficiency Standard. So that does put emphasis on landlords to improve the energy efficiency of their homes. And if they don't come up to standard, tenants can request that the landlord does make improvements. But obviously this has to be enforced by the local authority. And as we know, that can be quite tricky to actually take some of these enforcements forward. So I think it needs to be a balance of carrots and sticks. There does need to be better enforcement of these standards as we move towards the higher EPC levels, but also there does need to be the incentives in place for landlords to take these measures up.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. From Caroline, what low carbon alternatives are there to hydrogen particularly hydrogen reformed from natural gas for space heating. I don't know, Ian, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yes, I'll have a go at that. And I think hydrogen. We need hydrogen generated from renewable electricity in the national mix. But do you know what? I don't think we're going to be pumping it down the gas network and replacing fossil gas in any great quantities. Some areas of the country will probably have that. What we really need hydrogen to do is to replace gas in those really high energy intensive industries, like the chemical industry, where electricity doesn't really do the job that fossil gas does. And that's probably where we need to focus the relatively limited amounts of hydrogen that we need. So I would say that the solution to renewable heating of our homes is electric, but not doing it in the way that we do with night storage heaters, for example, today, which are really not very efficient and a lot more expensive than natural gas. If we use heat pumps in homes that have been insulated properly, then we can deliver affordable heat that is net zero carbon in the future as the grid decarbonizes. And I believe that that is probably going to be the solution for most properties in Devon, rather than hydrogen coming through the gas network. I don't believe that's going to happen here anytime soon.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Tim, got one for you from Julian. How can we encourage private capital to be invested to improve the efficiency of our buildings?
Yeah, thanks for that. Good question, highly relevant. Just if I can add a supplement to what Ian was saying about hydrogen, the observations that Ian's made are absolutely right, but there is a huge economic opportunity there. If we look at the transition in the rural economy, agricultural world, particularly around single farm payments being phased out, the opportunity for us to be growing some of the bio crops that then can produce green sources for electricity production that then feed into the solution of creating viable capacity for hydrogen production is absolutely on our agenda. So we need to think quite laterally about this. But the very good question is, where's the money and how's the market responding to that? It's very easy to fall back into a belief that this net zero agenda can only be achieved around behaviour change. What actually is happening at the moment is this is being driven by the marketplace. And if you look at the residential market and see how mortgage providers are now setting some really high standards against the requirement for buildings to demonstrate that they can display long-term sustainability standards well above some of the criteria that the government are looking at, or standard building regulations. If you want a current mortgage, and particularly some of the higher level mortgages, then you have to invest in some of the latest bits of kit. Otherwise, that mortgage is going to be more expensive, or you're going to have to put a bigger deposit in. So the message here is very clear that the market is responding to this, and this is all about future-proofing the value of the assets. When you build a house, you would expect it to still be there in 50 to 100 years' time. And for that reason, anyone who's investing in that with a 25, 30-year mortgage wants to know that it is future-proofed, and the energy efficiency of it is a key component. So in that respect, the market is having to respond to this. Slightly different equation if you look at the commercial market, which represents about 50% of the same problem. There we've got a different set of equations. If you look at the economic lifespan of commercial buildings, much shorter, so shops, factories and things like that, probably their economic cycle is about 20 years, and that is a very different, therefore, solution that the owners and investors are looking for. That has again completely changed, and COVID has been one of the big kickstarts to that relationship. We've only got to look at and see how our high streets are performing at the moment, which is redefined the relationship between landlords and tenants, and the ability and the willingness of tenants just to pay the rent without arguing about it has disappeared, quite literally disappeared. And that is a really fundamental step change in the way in which landlords are having to review their approach to the whole life costing of the buildings they're investing in to ensure that they can sustain an income. So in summary, the market is finding solutions here. There's a huge amount of activity around the agenda for sustainability in corporates, big and small. Most boardrooms are now talking about it. If you don't talk about sustainability, then you're either going to offend your customers or your brand value, or the ethics of your company are going to be questioned by employees, et cetera, et cetera. Shareholders and funders for businesses are now demanding this. So I'm very confident that the market will be finding some solutions. It's no good. We can't just continue to expect the government are going to pour money into these problems and hope that it'll go away, and that's the only solution for it. The market has to provide a solution for it, and we're beginning to see that happening.
Okay, thank you, Tim. We've got a question from Roxy. For this, we'll go to James and Karime. We'll come to James first. What's the role and value for community-led housing in this challenge?
Interesting question. I think I will link that to the previous comment, which is that in community-led housing, because they're essentially defining their own needs, they're in a better position to choose to have true zero carbon houses. So any approach to housing where the client group is able to actually define its own needs and choose to go higher than the national standards is obviously a clearer advantage. While I've got the mic, I noticed there's a couple of planners on the call as well. You might be wondering where the planning discussion is, because the built environment chapter of the carbon plan doesn't contain most of the planning content of the carbon plan. It's in the cross-cutting themes chapter, which is a very sort of dull sounding chapter, but actually it's where the stuff which kind of joins everything up is found. And that's where the majority of the planning recommendations, which are quite strong and progressive. And if there's time, I'll talk about that today, but it's just to reference some of the questions have been about planning strategy, and that stuff's generally in cross-cutting themes, not the built environment.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, James. Karime, would you like to come in on
I think he's covered
housing?
I think he's covered that comprehensively, that question.
Okay, in which case you're right, James, that we should probably give a little bit more airtime to planning. Ian, is it okay for you if James just comes in and says a few words about that?
Of course, go ahead, James.
Okay, well, I'll just summarize a bit of the planning content. So the Devon Carbon Plan is also recognising the importance of spatial planning. If you think about the activities of local government, there isn't really another one where you try and consider all of what happens in an area and how to make it work in a more zero carbon way. So the carbon plan is stressing the following four things. It says spatial planning has a clear role to reorganise society towards net zero living, ensuring that new development strongly contributes to the transformation required to achieve net zero. And that's not just new development's contribution to building efficiency, it's also the whole of new developments and how it affects behaviour change. I put in the chat earlier that we can only get about 50% of the emissions reductions we need through technical fix. The other half has to come through behaviour change, and we need both to hit net zero. It's not a kind of question of balancing them against each other. So the second is a point about the importance of place and people's connection to a location, and that should be a priority in all future developments, to create places where people feel they belong and are less likely to want to travel away from. Critical is the better linking of planning and transport planning. And the plan also is, and this is one of the most radical bits of the plan for me, says that relocalization, which is a kind of mouthful, but it basically means trying to get back to living smaller, should be an organizing principle wherever it can assist net zero in Devon. And this is not just an urban message about trying to get greater efficiencies in urban areas and more diversity and mixed development. It's a rural message too. And that's the final point in the carbon plan on spatial planning, is that Net Zero Devon needs to recognise the importance of rural areas in delivering net zero for their communities, both because 50% of our population lives in rural areas. So we need a solution which is net zero for them, rather than just saying, well, big places are more net zero than small places. But also we kind of drawing the focus of planning a bit wider for rural, because we need things like sequestration, we need local food networks, we need nature recovery. These are all things which rural has a really important role for its urban cousin, rather than just rural being a separate issue. So to start thinking systemically about how rural and urban within Devon work together to achieve net zero. And there are things the planning system can do to frame that picture, but then also specific policies to try and encourage the things we need to happen faster.
Can I add to that, Ian?
Quickly, Tim, we're going to have to move towards wrapping up shortly.
Yeah, so the planning white paper is also a great trigger, a catalyst for a new debate about how we approach the whole issue of construction materials. Modular construction, off-site construction is hugely more efficient, and the use of energy efficient building materials, which again is an opportunity for polymers and things like that, which can be grown out of biocrops and converted into building materials that absorb carbon rather than emit. There are some really interesting and radical thinking ideas behind this planning white paper, and we need to get hold of that agenda and really start interpreting that. And Karime's right at the front end of this, as ever. Modular construction is something that he's been heavily promoting, and bring it on, because it's absolutely vital.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you for that. And thank you for everybody for your questions. And we've done our best to answer as many of them as we could there. I think we will try and come back to people with answers to questions we haven't been able to answer here through the website behind the Carbon Action Plan. But if we can just hand over to the next steps, really. This carbon plan is not just a paper exercise. The job isn't done here. We've produced an interim plan. This is a democratic process, and democracy only works through participation. And this is the people of Devon's opportunity to participate in the agenda for a net zero carbon future. So we really need people to respond to this. And Hannah is going to talk us through what are the opportunities to respond to the Devon Carbon Plan. Over to you, Hannah.
Great, thank you very much. So the next steps for you are to read the plan on our website. A PDF version is now available to download. And then following this, complete the consultation. You can just complete sections that you're most interested in, for example, the built environment. And share the consultation, tell your friends, spread the word. We really want this to be a Devon-wide plan with everyone's involvement. And we also encourage you to attend some of the thematic webinars that are coming up in the new year, and the dates are on the next slide. There we go. So next is Food, Land and Sea on the 12th of January. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannah. So thank you to all our speakers today for taking time out of your busy schedules to take part in this. And thank you to everybody who's joined us today and asked their questions. And I'll just reiterate again, this plan will only work if people participate in the consultation process. This is the people of Devon's opportunity for us all to make some really clear statements to our politicians, to our leaders, to the big organisations in the public, private and voluntary sector about what we need to get to net zero. So please do respond. Please do join the other webinars if you're able to. And I think I can take the opportunity here to wish everybody a very safe Christmas and a more sustainable new year. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you for hosting.
You're welcome.
And thank you to all of the speakers and the panel members today, as well as everyone who has attended and participated. Much appreciated.